The smell hit me before I even opened the box. Rosemary, brown butter, and something underneath it, faint and metallic. Like old coins kept too long in a drawer. I hadn't smelled that exact combination since I was 11 years old, standing on a step stool while my mother taught me how to fold dough without tearing it. And now, here I was, 31, standing in the same kitchen, holding the same box. Except this time, she wasn't standing next to me telling me to be gentle. She'd been gone 6 weeks. The restaurant, the Tide House. A squat brick building 2 blocks from the harbor in Port Haven. Its windows always fogged from the ovens, was mine now. Mine and my sister Vivian's, technically, though Vivian hadn't set foot in the kitchen since the funeral. She said it was too hard. I understood that. I also understood that too hard for Vivian usually meant not my problem, but I was trying that week to be generous with her. The recipe box was cedar, the size of a shoebox, carved with a little anchor on the lid because my mother thought everything in this town needed an anchor on it somewhere. I'd found it shoved behind a flower bins, racked in a dish towel like she hadn't wanted anyone to notice it was there. Inside were the recipes I expected, her chowder card, stained translucent with butter, her biscuit recipe, half in her handwriting and half in her mother's, from 2 different decades layered on the same index card. And underneath all of it, flat against the bottom of the box, a bank ledger that didn't belong there at all. I almost didn't open it. I told myself it was probably just old receipts, the kind restaurant owners keep out of habit and never look at again. But something about the way it was hidden, tucked beneath the recipes, not with them, made my stomach tighten before I'd read a single number. The first entry was from 11 years ago, a withdrawal large enough that I had to read it twice. Then another, 3 months later. Then a third. Each one dated in my mother's careful cursive, each one followed by the same 2 words, paid direct. Paid to who? For what? I sat down on the flour-dusted stool where I'd been folding dough as a kid and read the ledger front to back. Twice. And by the second pass, my hands weren't steady anymore. 11 years ago was the year Vivian left for culinary school in the city. The year she came home 8 months later, quieter than I'd ever seen her, and told us she'd changed her mind about cooking, that she wanted to try something else. She'd never explained further. My mother never pushed. At the time, I thought it was just Vivian, being Vivian, restless, easily discouraged. I had no idea, not for 1 second in 11 years, that anything had actually happened to her. I called Vivian that night. She didn't pick up. I called again in the morning, and she answered sounding half asleep and instantly defensive, the way she always sounded when she suspected I was about to bring up something from the past. I found a ledger, I said, in Mom's recipe box, withdrawals. Big ones. Right around when you came home from school. Silence on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally said, and I believed her. That was the strange part. She genuinely didn't know. If you've ever gone through a parent's things after they're gone and found something that didn't fit the person you thought you knew, you understand why I couldn't put the ledger down after that. It felt like the last conversation my mother and I would ever have, except she wasn't the one talking. Stay with me, because this story only gets heavier from here. I'm telling it because someone out there is probably sitting in a kitchen or a garage or an attic right now holding a box that doesn't make sense either. And if that's you, subscribing helps me keep finding these stories and sharing them. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I do best under stress, which is cook and dig. I cooked through service every night on autopilot, and during the day, I went through every drawer in my mother's house, every folder in the filing cabinet she kept behind her bedroom door, every box in the attic that Vivian and I hadn't had the heart to open yet. What I found didn't come together as one clean answer. It came together as 100 small ones. I found a jewelry appraisal from that same year, her wedding ring and her mother's garnet earrings. both listed as sold. Both dated 2 weeks before the first withdrawal in the ledger. I found a stack of pay stubs showing she picked up a second job at the diner on Route 9, on top of running the restaurant for almost a full year. I found a note in her handwriting, just a grocery list on the back, except the front of the same paper had numbers scratched out and re-added a dozen times. The kind of math you do at 2 in the morning when you're trying to make something impossible fit. And in the very back of the filing cabinet, in a folder labeled Nothing, I found the letter. It was addressed to Vivian, sealed, never sent. I sat on the floor of my mother's bedroom for a long time before I opened it, because it felt like something that wasn't mine to read. But my mother wasn't here to tell me not to, and Vivian was still refusing to come near the house. And I told myself I'd give it to her, the second I understood what I was giving her. The letter explained everything. 11 years ago, 3 months into culinary school, Vivian had gotten into trouble, real trouble. The kind that 18-year-olds sometimes stumble into without meaning to. She'd co-signed something she didn't understand for a boyfriend at the time, a business opportunity that turned out to be nothing but a debt with his name and hers both attached to it, and when he disappeared, the debt didn't disappear with him. She came home terrified, ashamed, convinced she'd ruined her life before it had even started, and she told our mother, swearing her to secrecy, because she couldn't bear for me or our father to know how badly she'd been fooled. My mother didn't lecture her. She didn't tell anyone. She sold her wedding ring, took a second job at a diner most nights until close, and quietly paid off every dollar of that debt over the better part of a year. And she never once let Vivian carry the shame of knowing exactly how much it had cost her. The letter wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even really about the money. It was my mother trying to explain gently, years later, why she'd never told Vivian the truth about how it had actually been paid off. Why she'd let Vivian believe some vague story about family savings instead. "I didn't want you to spend your whole life feeling like you owed me something," she'd written. "I wanted you to feel free. That's all a mother wants. For the things she gave up to never feel like a debt in your hands. She'd never sent it. I think she meant to, someday, when Vivian was older, steadier, less likely to fall into that particular kind of guilt. And then there wasn't a someday left. I drove to Vivian's apartment that same afternoon with the letter in my coat pocket, and I sat across from her at her kitchen table. Smaller than ours, but she'd hung a copper pan on the wall, the exact way our mother used to, which I noticed and didn't say anything about. And I told her everything I'd found before I handed it over. The ledger, the jewelry, the second job. I wanted her to hear it from me first, gently, instead of cold off a page. She read the letter twice. The second time, her hands were shaking too much to hold it steady, and I reached across and held the other end so it wouldn't shake right out of her fingers. She never told me, Vivian said, so quiet I almost missed it. 11 years, and she never once let me feel bad about it. I thought. She stopped. Started again. I thought I just got lucky. I thought the debt just went away somehow, and I was too scared to ask questions in case asking made it real again. It didn't go away, I told her. She carried it so you wouldn't have to. That's not luck. That's what she chose. Every single week for a year. Vivian cried in a way I hadn't seen her cry since we were kids, not the composed, careful crying she usually allowed herself in front of people, but the real kind, shoulders shaking, both hands over her face. I didn't try to fix it. I just sat there with her, the way our mother used to sit with both of us, when something broke that couldn't be immediately unbroken. We didn't figure out what to do with any of it that night. Grief doesn't resolve on a schedule. And neither did this. But something shifted between us in the weeks after. Vivian started coming by the restaurant again first, just to sit at the counter with coffee, then one Tuesday, to actually put on an apron and help with the dinner prep, quiet and a little unsure, like she was learning the kitchen for the first time even though she'd grown up in it too. We ended up putting my mother's chowder back on the menu, It had quietly disappeared from the rotation a few years back. Nobody remembered exactly why, and we renamed it, just on the chalkboard, nothing official. Eleanor's chowder. Vivian wrote the name herself, in chalk, in handwriting that looked more like our mother's than either of us expected. She still hasn't paid me back for anything, and I never asked her to, because that was never the point. The point was that for 11 years a woman who ran a small restaurant in a small coastal town carried something heavy enough to sell her own wedding ring, and she carried it so quietly that neither of her daughters ever felt its weight, until one of them found a cedar box that smelled like rosemary and old coins, and finally understood exactly what her mother had given up and never once mentioned to keep her family whole. That's how it ended for me, but stories like this never really stop. If this one stayed with you, subscribe, because I've got more waiting.